Good, happy Monday evening, everyone. I'm Riley King, and welcome to this Monday evening edition of New Hampshire Life with Riley King. Let's begin. It's official. New Hampshire primary will be held February 11, 2020. Secretary of State Bill Gardner sets date at State House ceremony. Surrounded by family members of key pillars of New Hampshire primary history, Secretary of State Bill Gardner on Monday set the date of the 2020 contest for February 11, a date that had been long anticipated, but is now official. Gardner made it official by writing the date on a poster he created, organizing 6 key granite skaters who had important roles in making and keeping the primary first in the nation for the past 100 years. After the 6 guests autographed the poster, Gardner said, "Excuse me, it's my time to sign." But instead of signing his name, Gardner penned the date, February 11, 2020. With no challenges by other states in the current cycle, Gardner said that it was fairly easy time this time, compared to some of the other more tumultuous times, to set the date of the primary 7 days ahead of any similar election, as set out in a 1975 law. That statute was later updated to give Gardner flexibility to set the date whenever he considered necessary to preserve the primary's tradition. Gardner said that, unlike past cycles, no state directly challenged New Hampshire's requirement to have its primary a week ahead of any similar election in another state. The only potential wrinkle in the current cycle was California, which moved its primary from June in past cycles to March 3rd, 2020, but allows for early voting, which is to begin in early February, about the time of the Iowa caucus and a week ahead of the New Hampshire primary. The early voting in California is limited, said Gardner. I've actually researched that and talked to people who actually are involved in it, and it doesn't affect us. He said he also kept watch on Georgia, the only other state in which the Secretary of State sets the primary date, but Gardner said that once Georgia set its primary for March 24th, 2020, he was comfortable that New Hampshire leadoff statute would not be challenged. I don't know all that's happening across the country immediately, Gardner said. Sometimes it takes weeks or months to know that a state has made a certain change. I would set the date as early as I could. I don't need to wait, but when I do set it, it won't be changed, and I have never had to set a date and then have to change it, and that's really important to me in this process. February 11 is less than 12 weeks away, but Gardner has cut it considerably closer before in how far in advance he has set the date. He set the January 8th 2008 primary date less than 7 weeks ahead of that year's election day on November 26, 2007. He set a date as late as December 21st, 1995 for the February 20th, 1996 primary. Appearing at this ceremony with Gardner was former state senator and state rep Jim Spillane, who authorized the 1975 law, which has been updated several times since mandating that the primary be held 7 days ahead of any similar election in another state. Spillane defined the primary against criticism by some national pundits and presidential candidates, Julian Castro, who have complained that the state is not radically and ethnically diverse enough to deserve to hold the first contest. What state is the perfect state for the first-in-the-nation primary? Spillane said. Diversity is certainly important. We have a lot of economic diversity in New Hampshire. We also have the influence of a population that has a certain amount of diversity. But most important is that opportunity to be able to get candidates out there in their comfort zone and be able to have a dialogue while the rest of the nation is watching and seeing how they handle some of the questions that at times are not all that easy. Also appearing with Gardner were Sibley Dupuis, whose grandfather, Rep. Stephen A. Bullock, authorized the law creating the primary in 1913. Elizabeth Hamill Carter, granddaughter of Rep. John Glessner, who in 1915 changed the primary date from May to town meeting day in March. William Upton, son of the late House Speaker Richard Upton, who sponsored legislation for directing voting for presidential candidates rather than delegates on the primary ballot. Fierce Gregg, son of late Governor Hugh Gregg, who was a leading champion for the primary for more than 50 years. Patterson Smith, nephew of late Rep. Natalia Smith Flanagan, who sponsored and co-sponsored legislation in 1995 and 1999 that expanded the 1975 primary law to provide flexibility for the Secretary of State to provide the primary's first-in-the-nation status. Gardner defended the state's turnout as being among the highest in the nation for several presidential cycles, and said a new law requiring people who vote in the state to prove residency in the state will not affect that turnout. Gardner said that in 2016, 52% of the state's eligibility population of 18 years of age or older turned out to vote. We were the only state in the country with over 50% of eligibility voters voting, said Gardner. There was only one state over 40%. Every other state was either in 30s or the 20s over the teens, and advantage of the country was a little over 28%. Gardner said the state's turnout has also been much higher than the national average in the presidential general election of 2016 and 2012, when photo identification was required. He noted that critics had warned that photo ID would depress turnout, just as they are now warning that a residency requirement will suppress voting. When you balance the ease of voting with security of the process, that's the desire. And when you do that, states will be like us, Gardner said. We are the easiest state in the United States to vote, and we will remain the easiest state. The residency law doesn't change any part of the process of registering or voting, so I expect we're going to be just the way we were in previous cycles. We've always been the top of the country. While Gardner has the final say on the date of the primary and national political parties play a role in the calendar of nominating contests, both Republican and Democratic national committees have approved New Hampshire as an early voting state for the selection of delegates to their national conventions next summer, along with Iowa, Nevada, and South Carolina. Gardner said the corporation of the national parties made his job of picking a primary date relevantly easy. In some cycles, the national parties have been helpful, and in some cycles they haven't. And the last two cycles, the national parties have been helpful for us, he said. I was always looking at that date. He also defended the state's lack of an early voting competent. Early voting does not guarantee that you get more people to vote in a state like New Hampshire with the political culture that we have here, the political tradition that we have here. Voting is a community. He also said that in early voting states, sometimes voters are wasted because candidates drop out of the race before the early voting are continued. And that does it for this Monday evening edition of New Hampshire Life with Riley King. I hope you all enjoyed watching this Monday evening edition of New Hampshire Life with Riley King. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another edition of New Hampshire Life with Riley King. Good night and bye, everyone.